So transitive verbs are verbs that we use when a living being does something to an object. Sentences like, I eat the lettuce, or the cat kills the mouse. In I eat the lettuce, the subject is I or me. The verb that I am performing is eating, and the thing that I am doing the verb to is the lettuce. In the cat kills the mouse, the subject of the sentence is the cat. The thing that the cat is doing the verb to is a mouse, and the verb, the transitive verb that the cat is doing to that mouse is killing. So in Japanese, the formula for making a sentence with transitive verbs, we've already technically learned this a long time ago, we just didn't learn that it was for transitive verbs. So this formula is subject ga, object wo, transitive verb. Intransitive verbs, however, is when the verb is performed by something that is not a living being, and the verb also isn't necessarily performed to something or at something. So reworking the sentences from before with intransitive verbs, it would be something like the lettuce grows or the mouse dies. And in Japanese, the formula for sentences with intransitive verbs is subject ga, intransitive verb. So at this point, I have to make a confession. I, until rather recently, did not actually know the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs, even in English, let alone in Japanese. I knew that they were a thing, but I didn't actually know like what they were. I wouldn't be able to explain them as I am doing so now, until rather recently, embarrassingly so. But that's just the thing. Like, as a native English speaker, and even as somebody who knows Japanese and who picked it up a lot through context as well as from textbooks, you can get by, for the most part, not knowing the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs. It's something that you just kind of intuitively pick up. But there's one little but about this, though. In Japanese, there is a collection of verbs that are transitive and intransitive, and the transitive version of the verb is slightly different than the intransitive version of the verb. They'll have the same kanji, but like one of the hiragana characters will have a slightly different pronunciation. It'll be a different place in the hiragana chart than it is when it's a transitive verb versus an intransitive verb. So what do I mean by this? I'm going to give you some examples of such transitive-intransitive verb pairs. So one of these verbs is hajimeru versus hajimaru. If you've been following this series since Genki 1, Japanese for beginners, I used to begin all those videos with my little catchphrase, では始めましょう. It's hajimemashou, hajimeru. And even though there's no like subject or object in that sentence, it's like let's begin. Let's begin what? Let's begin the lesson. Lesson wo hajimemashou. Or watashi tachi wa, or ga, the subject, lesson, the object, o hajimemashou. Let us begin this lesson. We, the subject, are performing the verb, the transitive verb, because we're living beings and we are performing this transitive verb of hajimeru, beginning, to a lesson. So even if your sentence isn't complete, even if it doesn't have like a subject or an object in it, even if it's like just a verb, it still implies, well, we're doing this lesson to something. We, living beings, are doing this, we're beginning something. You know, we're beginning a lesson, we're beginning something, we're not just beginning. So if we were just beginning, if I was just saying the lesson is beginning, we are not starting the lesson, but the lesson is starting, that would be an intransitive verb. Lesson ga hajimaru. Not hajimeru, because that's transitive, hajimaru, intransitive. So the lesson, which is an inanimate object, begins. It doesn't begin anything, it doesn't perform the verb of beginning or starting to another object. It, the lesson itself, is performing the verb of its own volition of beginning. So that's kind of the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs in Japanese sentences. Hajimeru, transitive verb, hajimaru, intransitive verb. Again, when I learned Japanese, I didn't learn any of this transitive, intransitive stuff. I just intuitively picked it up. I'm just like, lesson wo hajimaru. I just knew that was wrong. So yeah, you can just kind of pick it up, but with these particular verb pairs, where they sound very, very similar, it is very helpful that you just memorize these pairs. So hajimeru, transitive, hajimaru, intransitive. Here's another couple sentences with hajimeru versus hajimaru. Party ga hajimaru versus party wo hajimeru. So again, your biggest clue is going to be the particle that comes before the verb. If it's an wo particle, it's a transitive verb. O means there's an object involved. It means that a verb is being performed to an object by a living being. But if it's a ga before the verb, it means that the subject, it means that the thing, the noun that comes before this verb is the thing that is doing the verb. So paartii ga hajimaru means the party starts. No one is starting the party, just the party of its own volition, the party starts. Versus paartii wo hajimeru, that means that somebody, we're not naming this somebody in the sentence, but somebody is starting the party. If we wanted to expand the transitive sentence with hajimeru just to get a better idea of who is starting the party, you could say Reiko-san ga paartii wo hajimeru. So that means Reiko-san, Reiko is starting the party, or Reiko starts the party. Or Reiko's going to start the party because Japanese doesn't have future tense. Yeah. So one thing you have to get out of your mind right now is don't assume that if it's a sentence with an intransitive verb that a living being is not involved. A living being can still be involved. Just think, is the noun in the sentence performing the verb and is just performing it? Or is the noun in the sentence performing the verb to another noun in the sentence, either implied or in the actual sentence? So here are a couple other sentences that both involve Yamada-san, a living being. Yamada-san ga hashitta. So what kind of verb is that? Is it a transitive verb or an intransitive verb? Yamada-san ga hashitta. So it is intransitive. Yamada-san or Yamada ran. And that's all. He didn't perform the action of running to anything. You can't run to something. I mean, you can run directionally towards something, but you can't like perform the verb of running to someone. I ran Joshua. I could say I made Joshua run, but I can't say I ran Joshua because it's an intransitive verb. English and Japanese, it's an intransitive verb. Here's another sentence though involving Yamada-san, and it's with a transitive verb. Yamada-san wa hon wo yomu. So as for Yamada, hon wo, that's your hint. Wo, that means it's a transitive verb. Yomu, so Yamada reads books. So now I'm going to give you some pairs of transitive verbs versus intransitive verbs that sound very similar, but that have slight differences. One is oeru versus owaru. So note the only difference is that middle, that hiragana character in the middle, e versus wa. And you'll notice it usually is kind of like that. It's in the same or similar column or row, depending on how your hiragana chart is set up. And it'll just be a different a, I, u, e, o on the scale. So e versus wa. Oeru, transitive. So here's a sentence with it. Jugyo wo oeru. That's a lot of o's in a row. Jugyo wo oeru. Jugyo wo oeru. So I end the class, or somebody ends the class. A living being ends the class. Versus jugyo ga owaru. The class ends. No one ends the class just ends, like of its own volition. Here's another pair, akeru versus aku. Akeru is the transitive verb. The verb where like I or you could perform this action of opening to an object. So here's a sentence. Doa wo akeru. I open the door. You open the door. She opens the door. Somebody, a cat, opens the door. Some living being opens the door. Yure ga, the ghost, opens the door. Versus doa ga aku, which is just the door opens of its own volition, not by a ghost or by you or me. It just opens on its own. The door is performing the verb, the action of opening. Here's another pair, shimeru versus shimaru. Again, note, almost identical, same kanji. It's just that middle hiragana character goes from me to ma. Ma, mimu, me, mo. Ma, mimu, me, mo. Same column, just different vowels. So, mise wo shimeru. I close the shop, you close the shop, they close the shop, somebody closes the shop, versus mise ga shimaru. The shop closes. Nobody closes the shop, it does of its own volition. The shop closes. Here's another one, ireru versus hairu. So this is very different. The kanji's the same though. And if you look, the hiragana, the mokurigana that come right after that kanji are slightly different. Ireru has that re hiragana character in there. That's kind of what tells you, it's supposed to be pronounced ireru. Versus hairu, it's just ru at the end. It's not ha-i-ru. The hi part is in the kanji. So, ocha wo ireru, I will make some tea. Versus ocha ga hairimashita. The tea is made, basically. I'm not specifying who made it. No living being made this tea. The tea, it's been made of its own volition. And actually, this is kind of a pair of sentences that I would say as a host. I'd be like, ocha o ireru ne? Like, I'll just go make some tea. And then when I come back with the tea, I'd say, ocha ga hairimashita. Like, here's the tea. It has been made now. The tea is ready, basically. Here's another one. Dasu versus deru. This one's like not even the same characters on the hiragana chart. You got su versus ru. And then the kanji pronunciation changes too. It changes from dasu to deru. But note, it's the same kanji. And dasu and deru mean a lot of different things. It means like to exit or to bring out, basically. So, keiki wo dasu. Means like to bring out some cake, to present some cake like to your guests, versus keiki ga deru. This is kind of like something ga deru. It's often like, there's going to be something or another at this event. So, there will be cake at this event. I'm not performing an action to the cake. The cake itself is going out at this event. Here's another one, tsukeru versus tsuku. Tsukeru is the transitive verb, which means like to turn on. Well, it means lots of different things, but in this case, we're going to use with light. Denki wo tsukeru. I, or somebody, turns on a light, versus denki ga tsuku, which is the light turns on. We're not specifying who turned it on. Maybe nobody turned it on. Maybe it's on a timer, and the light turns on. And here's one last pair. Kesu versus kieru. So again, the kanji are the same, but they're pronounced differently. And then you've got like a hiragana su after the kesu versus an eru hiragana after kieru. So yeah, very different there, but same kanji, same meaning. It means to disappear or to erase. So kesu, since that's the transitive verb, since that's the verb that I perform to an object, that's more like to erase something, versus kieru, that's the intransitive verb that just the subject is doing of its own volition, not doing to anything. It is just performing this verb, so that's more like to disappear or to vanish. So ashi ato wo kesu would mean I erase our footprints. Like I'm walking in the snow and I'm like rubbing them out as I walk behind. Ashi ato wo kesu. I'm erasing my footprints. Versus ashi ato ga kieru means our footprints vanish, or just the footprints vanish. We don't make them vanish. No living being makes them vanish. Maybe just snow covers them, and because of that, they vanish. The snow is not like actively making them disappear. Just as a result of snow falling, the footprints vanish. So that's the intransitive verb. So one final note for transitive versus intransitive verbs is how they behave when you're using the te-iru form of a verb. With transitive verbs, te-iru with a verb usually means that I am performing this verb. I am eating. I am dancing. I am singing. But with intransitive verbs, it means that this thing that's performing this verb, it is in the state of being. But you usually don't translate it or think of it as is doing this verb. And here are some examples. Here's a transitive sentence. Onee-chan wa doa o aketeiru. That means my big sister is opening, aketeiru, the door. Versus intransitive, doa ga aiteiru. That's just the door is open, not the door is opening. It is in the state of being open because it's an intransitive verb. Here's another transitive. Seeraa Puruuto wa jikan wo tometeiru. So as for Sailor Pluto, she is stopping time currently. She is performing the action right now. She is stopping time because she has that power. Versus intransitive, jikan ga tomatteiru. Time has stopped, or time is stopped. We don't say time is stopping. This isn't like time is currently in the process. It is performing the verb of stopping. You kind of can't perform the verb of stopping like once you stopped, you stopped. So the time is in the state of being stopped is kind of what that means in a roundabout way. Better English, time is stopped. For timestamps for all of the phrases that I covered in this video, check the pinned comment in the comment section or the video description. I have timestamps. Also, don't learn all your Japanese from me. I am just one perspective. I am a non-native Japanese speaker, so it's good to learn from a variety of sources so you can get a more well-rounded experience. Thanks for watching, and thank you to all of the patrons who support this and the other series on this channel. And be sure to tune in next week when we cover the te shimau versions of verbs. 頑張ってね!